stroopwafels, tulips, and now the nationalization of Nexperia, a Chinese entity. The Netherlands seems to have a lot going for it. Let's talk about it.
So about 10 days ago, what we learned was that the government of the Netherlands has basically taken over, essentially nationalized, a company called Nexperia, a Chinese chips manufacturer that it has offices and manufacturing facilities around the world, of which the one that has been essentially nationalized is in the Netherlands. One of the things that's baffling is we are trying to discern or understand what was the Netherlands thinking when they were going through this decision. And we have a theory that it's probably going to have tentacles from the United States and maybe other Western powers in order for them to say, yes, we'll back you up for this decision. Having said that, of course, China took this very calm response. After about 2 days, they immediately said, we're going to sanction and stop any rare earth minerals to be able to flow to Nexperia. Now, the reason that the Netherlands is stating that they wanted to do this is because they said they needed to have a firm supply of chips secured for the Netherlands and the EU for national security concerns. And this excuse that we keep hearing more and more and more, we're starting to now see it in more grave areas. The part that I wanted to sort of cap off on this little update is the fact that we just found out the entire EU automotive industry is at risk because now manufacturing facilities are grinding to a halt. They do not have the critical rare earth minerals that are required to be able to proceed with manufacturing. And so now this move has not only hurt the Netherlands, it's hurt the entire EU.
Wait, so are you saying that China first, 2 days after this happened and Nexperia was taken by the Netherlands, so 2 days later, they sanctioned and decided to stop giving rare earth minerals to Nexperia? Are you saying that now they've also decided to do the same to the EV market? Or the auto market generally?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we're starting to see is there's indications that the automotive facilities, the manufacturing facilities that are all over Europe are starting to slow down production because of the fact that they don't have some raw materials.
Which, assuming that the US is behind all of this and the Netherlands' decision to nationalize Nexperia, or at least that office of Nexperia, now it comes down to the Netherlands having to decide between EU loyalty or US loyalty. Which one do you think is going to win out?
I think that they still have to stay with the US. Decoupling from the US and moving towards China not only would take an apology that I don't know the Dutch would be willing to make, and it's not to say that they wouldn't, and it's also not to say that the Chinese wouldn't accept it and be able to move forward, because they are looking to stabilize the markets from the Chinese perspective. But at the same time, decoupling really does mean unhooking the economy and the geopolitical side of the Netherlands from the United States. And that has other concerns that would very likely create way more rifts, way more problems into the short term. And so my guess is they're still going to stay with this position and perhaps try to hide in the shade because they don't really have another move from here.
So what will this mean for EU auto manufacturers? As you and I have stated before, 90% of rare earth mineral supply chain owned by our pals in China. So now if they have to go elsewhere to get access to those minerals, they're going to have to develop new alliances, build reliance on other entities. I believe France was already exploring rare earth mineral sites. Was it in parts of Africa or elsewhere? Was it the Middle East? They're just going to have to do all that faster.
Yeah, and we know that the process of not just finding rare earth minerals, but also processing it, that's really where the monopoly is with China. We also know that the government of Australia has provided a 1 billion Australian dollar loan to mining companies to be able to start that entire process. But that's going to take years. And so what's likely to happen in the meantime is that not only will manufacturing facilities slow down, but that means that demand slows down because essentially it can't be fulfilled. And this is just going to hurt GDP. It's going to hurt the economies in the EU, and it's going to hurt exports. It's just going to start tanking an already weak set of economies here.
And I wonder if what the EU can do is what China has been accused of doing by the US in terms of accessing those NVIDIA chips, which is using a third-party, third-country intermediary to get access to those chips. I wonder if the EU will try doing the same.
There's a rule both by the United States and by China that looks at subsidiary movements that is trying to limit this sort of shady movement of critical rare earths. And the reason that's important is because of the fact that there is a very specific list that identifies subsidiaries and related companies and actually stops them from having access. So it aggregates the quantities and it says that you are on this list. I'm sorry, either you have no access, or even if you do, your other entire group of subsidiary companies will only have this quantity. And for these purposes, right, because the Chinese methodology of being able to provide critical rare earths is essentially an application process that vets the usage of the minerals and then decides if it's for non-military uses, they can actually issue the minerals, but they can also slow roll the minerals. And that's one of the things that we've also seen. So the World Trade Organization makes it illegal for you to be able to categorically say no. But there are other ways of being able to essentially handicap your competition.
Another thing then that the EU could do and use as maybe a negotiation lever is removing the high tariffs that they have implemented on Chinese vehicles. So unlike the US, depending on which EU nation you're in, you can access Chinese manufactured vehicles like BYD, one of my personal favorites. But in order to do so, you have to pay a ton of money as a consumer to actually access it because of those tariffs. So maybe China would be willing to provide and give some of those rare earth minerals that have been fully processed and gone through the necessary mechanisms if we see a reduction in tariff rates. This isn't the only lever at play. And as you and I have always said, China's thinking at least 5,000 steps ahead. So by doing this, by making this such an abrupt stop, it not only indicates that, you know what, we're not taking bullying, we're not taking the nationalization of our Chinese companies, but also there's probably something else at play. There always is.
This is just my personal opinion. I also don't think that China needs to access the EU markets more than it already has, because their position on critical rare earth minerals is so powerful as a bargaining tool. It is an absolute monopoly when it comes to this. And then we see everyone who tries to breach their position or the Chinese position on these minerals, they just get completely tanked. And I think that the Chinese vehicle companies are still doing very well. Nonetheless, they're still leading in the leaderboard for sales. And so as a result, one of the things that we also know is that they can continue to grow without having to access additional parts of the EU market. And I'm sure that the answer lies somewhere in between. So they will maybe allow additional sales, reduce some of the tariffs, but I also don't think that there is a desire now, especially since we've seen how the EU is acting, to be able to reopen a free flow of critical rare earth minerals over to the EU.